Good evening. Please get comfortable. Lower the brightness or set your device to the side if that feels easier. We'll move at a relaxed pace. This episode is something the host wanted to make a long time ago. For one reason or another, it kept being postponed. Other subjects seemed more urgent, timing didn't work out, and the plan was continually pushed back. Recently, though, the situation changed. News arrived from Paris, and it brought the topic back into focus. Many people heard about the recent theft at the Louvre, the most famous and most visited museum in the world. Reports described how thieves carried out a deliberate operation and removed highly valuable pieces. That incident became the starting point for this ranking, and it immediately raised familiar conversations about the path stolen valuables often take once they leave public space. Specialists explained that there are several ways this can unfold. Stolen items can be taken apart, stones removed, metal recast, and the pieces sold in separate transactions. When that happens, the original cultural object is gone. Another possibility is that the theft occurs because someone specifically ordered the item. In that situation, the piece tends to remain intact. It is hidden, sometimes in a private safe, and only shared quietly with trusted people. Nothing about this resembles public display. One might bring friends over for a meal or a drink and briefly show them what was taken, then return it to secure storage. The reaction to the recent Louvre case reflects more than just curiosity about the missing objects. People discussed how these moments affect a country's sense of identity. When valuable pieces disappear, the event becomes more than a crime. It feels symbolic. Questions arise about who requested the theft and who benefits from it. There is also uncertainty about where the items will go. Will pieces be broken down to make profit easier, or will someone preserve them privately? Those considerations led naturally into a broader conversation about previous events at the same museum. It is not the first time the Louvre has been targeted. Later, in 1911, a different case took place. In that incident, the object was not a diamond measured by carat weight, but a painting that, according to the person who took it, had a connection to Napoleon. That earlier event stands as another reminder that even places designed to secure the world's most valuable works are vulnerable. With that history in mind, the host began selecting examples for this list. This episode presents 10 major heists beginning in the 20th century and continuing to the present day. They include the theft of paintings, diamonds carried off in significant quantities, and very large sums of money. Some of the stories are widely known, others are less familiar, even though the amounts involved are substantial. The host notes that several of these cases were new to him, despite their scale. One example involves more than $1 billion. Throughout, the pattern is consistent. Valuable objects are taken in a way that suggests planning, knowledge of a location's layout, and time management. The pieces vanish, and whoever once owned them sees nothing return. Whether the goal is private ownership, financial benefit, or carrying out instructions from someone else, the result is similar. Paintings are removed from museum walls. Display cases holding jewelry are opened or bypassed. Cash disappears from places that are supposed to be protected. In many cases, what happens afterward is unclear. Objects may be sold piece by piece, or they might spend decades locked away. Before we begin the countdown, here is a brief reminder. If you'd like to support the channel, leave a like and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. With all of this in mind, we start at number 10. Our first story takes us to Paris, more than a century ago, inside one of the most famous museums in the world, the Louvre. In 1911, it was already a cultural landmark, though not yet the global attraction it would later become. Visitors came to see many works, And at that time, the painting we now think of as the symbol of the museum, the Mona Lisa, was not the main star. It was appreciated, certainly, but it didn't carry the almost mythical reputation it has today. On the morning of August 22nd, a curator made his usual rounds. He noticed something odd: a blank space on the wall where Leonardo da Vinci's portrait normally hung. At first, he assumed the painting had simply been removed for cleaning or photography. That wasn't unusual. But no paperwork matched, no staff had requested it, and the Mona Lisa was nowhere to be found. What began as confusion quickly turned into panic. Museum workers searched storage rooms, restoration studios, and photography spaces. Nothing. The Louvre closed its doors. Newspapers began printing headlines. Within days, the story spread across France and then beyond its borders. Suddenly, this quiet portrait of a woman with a half-smile became famous, not for its style or its history, but because it was gone. Investigators combed through the building. The frame and protective case were eventually found, abandoned in a stairwell. That meant the thief had worked calmly enough to remove the painting from the frame somewhere inside the museum, then carry only the canvas out. The police questioned everyone. Suspicion even fell on artists who spent time at the Louvre, including a young Pablo Picasso. His friend, the poet Guillaume Apollinaire, was also questioned. Both were released. Neither had anything to do with the crime. Weeks passed, then months. No leads. The painting had simply vanished. For 2 years, the Mona Lisa remained missing. Many believed it had already left Europe, but in reality, it had never gone far. The thief was Vincenzo Perugia, an Italian who had once worked at the Louvre as a laborer. He knew the layout and knew how to remove the painting without drawing attention. After taking it, he simply walked out with the canvas hidden under his clothes and kept it in his small rented room in Paris. Perugia later said he believed the Mona Lisa belonged in Italy, not France. Whether this was patriotism or just something he told himself after the fact, no one can know for sure. What is clear is that he kept the painting quietly for 2 years. In 1913, he tried to sell it to an art dealer in Florence. The dealer agreed to examine it, then alerted the authorities. The Mona Lisa was recovered, undamaged. When it returned to France, the painting's reputation had changed completely. The theft had made it a global headline. People who had never heard of Leonardo da Vinci's portrait before now wanted to see it. Crowds gathered not because it was considered the greatest painting, but because it had been taken and then found again. It's fair to say that the theft transformed the Mona Lisa into what it is today. Not just a painting, but a symbol. A quiet portrait that once hung unnoticed became one of the most recognized images in the world. With that, we move ahead into the next story, another theft, carried out under entirely different circumstances and remembered for its own unusual details. From the story of a quiet Italian workman sneaking a Renaissance portrait out of the Louvre, we stay in Paris, though more than a century later, the atmosphere is very different. This time, the target is not a small canvas hidden under a coat, but entire trays of diamonds, necklaces, and watches, displayed under bright showroom lighting on Avenue Montaigne, one of the city's most prestigious streets. The first robbery took place in October of 2007. It was daytime, and business seemed normal when 4 men entered the Harry Winston boutique dressed as construction workers. Their outfits didn't draw special attention. The building, like many others in Paris, often had maintenance going on. Once inside, though, they switched roles quickly. The group moved with a sense of purpose, as if they knew exactly where they wanted to go. The entire operation lasted around 10 minutes. They broke display cases, gathered roughly 900 pieces, including diamond bracelets, platinum rings, and watches, and exited quietly. The estimated value was around $16 million. There were no dramatic chases, no gunfire, and in the days that followed, no real leads. No arrests were made, and none of the items were recovered. For many, the event felt like a perfectly executed strike. Fast, targeted, and then gone. The boutique repaired the damage. Life returned to its routine. And then, just over a year later, it happened again. In December of 2008, at about 7:30 in the evening, 4 people arrived at the same Harry Winston store. Their appearance was striking. 2 were elegant men. The other 2 looked like fashionable women, wearing wigs and couture clothing. They blended easily into the environment. Nothing about the group seemed out of place. Staff assumed they were luxury clients, and they were welcomed in without hesitation. Once inside, things changed quickly, but quietly. Weapons appeared, yet the group kept the atmosphere controlled. They addressed employees by name, suggesting they had spent time studying the people who worked there or had access to internal details. They also seemed familiar with the alarm system and the location of the highest value stones. Their movements were steady, and their instructions to the staff were short and calm. In the space of about 15 minutes, display cases and the safe were emptied. Among the pieces taken was a Cartier necklace valued at around $1.5 million. Altogether, the group left with jewels worth more than $100 million. Then, they slipped back into the city. Investigators eventually drew connections to a network known informally as the Pink Panthers, a loose group associated with a series of high-end jewelry thefts across Europe and beyond. These operations were known for clean disguises, careful planning, and fast exits, often leaving authorities with few immediate clues. Some progress eventually came. A portion of the Harry Winston Hall was found later in Saint-Denis, on the northern edge of Paris. 19 rings and 3 pairs of earrings, worth roughly 20 million euros. The recovery suggested that the group had safe storage sites and possibly local assistance. But most of the stolen jewelry, from both 2007 and 2008, has never been found. These 2 robberies, carried out at the same boutique just a year apart, became part of modern Parisian criminal history. The contrast with the Mona Lisa theft is striking. That painting gained fame after its disappearance. Harry Winston's treasures already had fame, and these thefts only deepened the mystery surrounding the people who dared to take them. Our next story stays within the world of high-value jewels, but its setting and method are very different. This time, the scene shifts away from Paris to a place where the glitter of diamonds meets the glamour of a seaside hotel. From Paris, our path follows the trail of fine stones south to the French Riviera. Cannes, known for its film festival and quiet luxury, is a place where expensive pieces are shown almost as casually as everyday objects. In July of 2013, one of those displays was held at the Carlton Hotel, an exhibition of jewelry associated with Lev Leviev. It was late morning, around 11:30. The halls were bright, the atmosphere relaxed. Then, a single masked man entered. He was armed, and he made no effort to hide the weapon. There was no dramatic entrance or lengthy standoff, just quick, controlled movement. He went straight to the display cases, opened or cleared them with practiced motions, and gathered what he came for. The entire action lasted roughly a minute. That was all. Then he left. The value of the jewelry taken was estimated at more than 100 million euros. For an exhibition that had been designed to highlight some of the most striking pieces in the collection, the loss was staggering. The speed and simplicity of the event surprised nearly everyone involved. Security footage offered little help. The recording was blurry, and no identifying features could be confirmed. Investigators found no fingerprints. There was no abandoned vehicle, no clear escape route, and no major signs of planning beyond the choice of timing and location. The crime seemed almost effortless, not because it lacked risk, but because every second had been used with purpose. Nothing from the stolen collection has ever been recovered. No arrests followed. The story remains one of the most striking examples of how a single person, moving confidently at the right moment, can walk away with treasures that took years to assemble. With that, we leave the quiet halls of the Carlton and continue onward. Our next case takes us into the world of private banking, a setting that seems secure until a single decision opens a door no one expected. From the French Riviera, we travel north to London. Knightsbridge, a quiet neighborhood filled with expensive homes, polished storefronts, and people who rarely ask each other questions. If Paris stores diamonds in bright windows, London often keeps them tucked away, out of sight. In July of 1987, most passers-by would not have noticed anything unusual happening on Cheval Place. There stood the Knightsbridge Safe Deposit Center, an unremarkable building on the outside, but inside it held something far more valuable than marble floors or chandeliers. Dozens of private vault boxes rented by people who preferred discretion. On Saturday, July 12th, shortly before closing time, two men arrived. They presented themselves as potential clients, polite, calm, interested in renting a safe deposit box. The staff escorted them down to the vault area, where viewing rooms allowed customers to handle what they stored away from public eyes. Once the door closed, the atmosphere changed. The two men pulled out guns. The staff and guards were forced to the floor. To keep anyone from wandering in, they placed a small sign on the vault door, something ordinary, almost casual, closed for private service. It worked. Anyone arriving would have assumed a customer wanted privacy. With the vault secured, the group began opening boxes. There were no explosives, no drilling through floors, just controlled access and enough time. In all, they managed to open 123 boxes. Inside were diamonds, gold, stacks of cash, and documents that their owners had never planned to show anyone. The entire operation lasted roughly 20 minutes. By the time they left, the estimated loss was placed around $112 million, but even that number is uncertain. Not every client wanted to admit what they had kept there. Some declared only a watch or a ring. Others said nothing at all. Inside these private boxes were the kinds of assets that don't appear on balance sheets, and their disappearance was often best left unmentioned. In that quiet space, some of London's hidden wealth simply vanished. For a time, police had little to work with, but the investigation eventually turned toward a man named Valerio Vicei, an Italian known to law enforcement for previous robberies. He had been living in London, carrying himself with a kind of careful confidence. Alongside him was an insider, Parvez Latif, who helped make the plan possible from within. The breakthrough came from a small detail, a fingerprint left at the scene. Vicei fled the country, but eventually returned, famously because he wanted access to his Ferrari. That decision ended his attempt to stay ahead of the investigation. He was arrested and later sentenced. Most of the stolen valuables were never found. Stories like this one unfold quietly. A pair of men walked into a building, spent less than half an hour inside, and left London without raising alarms. The vault continued standing where it always had, on a quiet street, its outward appearance unchanged. Inside, however, the spaces behind many small metal doors were suddenly empty. From here, the story moves again, this time to Switzerland, where a small bank held a secret no window could reveal. Before we move to Antwerp, there is a group worth pausing on, one that appears again and again in stories of high-value jewelry theft across Europe and beyond. They are often called the Pink Panthers. The name suggests a single organization, but that isn't quite accurate. It is closer to a loose network of individuals, roughly 120 to 150 people, many of whom came from the Balkans. They did not resemble a formal hierarchy. Instead, they worked in small teams, sometimes overlapping, sometimes changing partners, connected more by shared experience than by a central command. What made them notable was preparation. They studied a location carefully, understood the routines of staff, and rehearsed steps in ways that made even complicated robberies look simple. When they moved, they did so quickly, in and out, before alarms could trigger a meaningful response. Speed was part of their signature. Over time, investigators connected their operations to an estimated total of around $500 million worth of stolen jewelry. These were not isolated strikes. They took part in or influenced thefts in Paris, Zurich, New York, Tokyo, and Dubai, among other places. Their consistency across different regions and storefronts made them stand out. The group received its name from an unusual detail in one case. After a robbery, a diamond was found hidden inside a jar of face cream, a moment that reminded investigators of a scene from the old comedy film The Pink Panther. The nickname remained, even though the group itself had no interest in the comparison. Rather than invent new methods for every job, they developed a kind of template. Observe the shop, learn the rhythm of deliveries, study how security behaves, not only on paper, but in small human habits. Then strike at a moment when the staff expects a customer, not a threat. Because they adapted quickly from one location to another, some of their techniques later influenced other groups and even independent thieves who saw how effective planning and calm execution could be. You could find traces of their approach in earlier stories: the quiet entry into a boutique, the ability to blend into a place where wealth feels ordinary, the focus on speed rather than force. Different teams, different cities, but a familiar rhythm. This brings us to Antwerp, 2003, a case that also reflects careful preparation and a patient understanding of how value is stored, not just displayed. We had just been talking about groups who preferred speed and disguise. Antwerp shows another face of high-value crime, one built on patience and technical detail. The break-in took place overnight between February 15 and 16, 2003. The organizer was Leonardo Notarbartolo, and this was not an impulsive job. According to the account, the group spent roughly 2 years preparing. They rented a small office inside the building that housed the Diamond Center, and they used it to study movements, delivery routines, and the behavior of security systems. Then strike at a moment when the staff expects a customer, not a threat. Because they adapted quickly from one location to another, some of their techniques later influenced other groups and even independent thieves who saw how effective planning and calm execution could be. You could find traces of their approach in earlier stories: the quiet entry into a boutique, the ability to blend into a place where wealth feels ordinary, the focus on speed rather than force. Different teams, different cities, but a familiar rhythm. This brings us to Antwerp, 2003, a case that also reflects careful preparation and a patient understanding of how value is stored, not just displayed. We had just been talking about groups who preferred speed and disguise. Antwerp shows another face of high-value crime, one built on patience and technical detail. The break-in took place overnight between February 15 and 16, 2003. The organizer was Leonardo Notarbartolo, And this was not an impulsive job. According to the account, the group spent roughly 2 years preparing. They rented a small office inside the building that housed the Diamond Center, and they used it to study movements, delivery routines, and the behavior of security systems. Having that rented presence gave them a degree of access and familiarity most outsiders could never reach. When they acted, they targeted multiple layers of protection. Motion detectors were interfered with by spraying hairspray on sensors. Thermal cameras were shielded so they would not pick up body heat. CCTV feeds were spoofed to show normal empty rooms while the thieves moved. The plan was methodical. Bypass sensors, make the cameras lie, and work in the dark where the system expected only silence. In total, they opened somewhere between 123 and 160 safe deposit boxes, taking diamonds, gold, and other jewelry. The estimated loss was about $113 million. Even the aftermath left traces. In a nearby wood, police later found trash bags containing wrappers, tape, notes, and half a sandwich. Those ordinary leftovers proved decisive. DNA and other evidence from the discarded items pointed toward Notartabadalo. He was arrested, tried, and sentenced to roughly 10 years in prison. Despite the scale of the theft, recoveries were minimal. Only about 78,000 euros was ever retrieved. Antwerp's raid stands out because it relied on slow, careful study of a secure environment rather than a sudden show of force. It was a technical attack on systems designed to be trustworthy, and it showed how a team with patience and the right tactics could still find a way inside. From Antwerp, the story moves on to other sophisticated or surprising jobs, each one a small study in how value is protected and sometimes how that protection can be undone. After stories of airports and tarmacs, our narrative turns east, to the late Soviet period, where a very different sort of theft took place. This one did not target glittering shops or international flights. It moved through a bank's quieter rooms and relied on people who knew the building from the inside. The operation centered in Soviet Armenia and involved 2 cousins, Nikolai and Felix Kalachian, with help from an insider at the bank, Zavin Bagdasaryan. The sums in question were smaller than the headline million-dollar jobs we've seen in the West, but in context they were enormous. About 1.5 million rubles total, roughly $2 million at the time. Their plan was unusual. Rather than forcing the main entrance, they began from a restroom on the building's 3rd floor. From there, they drilled and made attempts to reach the vault below. Their first efforts failed. The building's construction, and perhaps the stress of working covertly in a public space, made quiet progress difficult. On one occasion, they tried drilling and found their approach blocked. Frustration grew. Then, in a move that sounds almost improvised, they changed tactics. One of the men made a daring jump from the window to reach the lower levels, an awkward and risky maneuver, but it worked. They gained access, and in an initial take, they managed to remove roughly 500,000 rubles. The money they took was made of many stacks of 100-ruble notes, often sharing the same series numbers. That detail made spending the bills risky. Serial numbers could be tracked and matched. Still, the thieves tried to move money into circulation. They needed a way to launder funds so the bills would not immediately point back to them. The case soon reached the highest levels of Soviet power. The theft attracted attention beyond the local police. It got as far as Leonid Brezhnev, who ordered involvement from the KGB and MVD. That mobilization signaled the seriousness of the crime and the degree to which the authorities wanted a quick resolution. Part of the group's attempt to hide the money involved buying government 3% bonds through an intermediary known as Volodya. The idea was to convert cash into a seemingly legitimate financial instrument and then move it through official channels. In practice, the scheme proved vulnerable. Investigators followed the trail, identified the intermediaries, and began making arrests. At the subsequent trials, the authorities laid out the plan in full: the initial break-in via the restroom, the drilling attempts, the risky window maneuver that finally worked, and the laundering effort through bonds. The participants were tried and sentenced according to Soviet law. Many of the stolen rubles were never successfully laundered into usable assets. This case stands apart from the boutique robberies and airport hijacks not just for its setting, but for how directly it involved the state's security apparatus. When money moved in the Soviet system, it could trigger responses at the very top. The Kolachian cousin story shows how a theft that began in a small building could end with the full machinery of the state turned toward recovery. From Armenia's bank corridors, our route now takes us back westward to another dramatic theft, this time in a city that would go on to be defined by glamour and celebrity. After the Soviet story, we travel across the world to Boston and to what is still considered the most valuable art theft in modern history. It happened in the early morning of March 18, 1990, just after midnight, the city still settling down from St. Patrick's Day celebrations. Most people were asleep. The museum stood quiet. Around 12:30 a.m., two men arrived at the entrance dressed as Boston police officers. They carried what looked like proper badges and behaved with enough confidence that the night guard on duty, Rick Abath, chose to let them inside. The decision would become the central mystery of the case, a small moment at a quiet hour that opened the door to one of history's great disappearances. Once inside, the two men acted fast. Abath was told he was under arrest and was brought downstairs. The second guard on duty, Randy Hestand, was also seized. Both were taken to the basement, taped and handcuffed to a steam pipe, effectively removing any security presence. With the guards neutralized, the two intruders had time. They walked freely through the galleries for approximately 81 minutes, an extraordinary length of time for any robbery, let alone in a major museum. They knew what they wanted. From the walls, they took 13 works of art. The value has been estimated at around $500 million. Among the losses, a Vermeer, one of the rarest artists in the world, works by Rembrandt, drawings by Degas. Rather than carefully removing canvases, some pieces were cut from their frames. And in one of the most striking details, the empty frames were left hanging afterward, silent outlines of what was taken. When staff arrived later and discovered what had happened, the theft was already complete. The two men had vanished. The guards were found bound in the basement. The only record was what had been left behind. The investigation that followed has stretched more than 3 decades. The museum has offered substantial rewards for information, at times as high as $10 million. Leads have surfaced, faded, resurfaced again. Theories have included organized crime involvement, art smuggling networks, and private collectors. But despite all the speculation, none of the 13 works has ever been recovered. Today, if you visit the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, you can still see those empty frames displayed on the walls. They remain there intentionally, placeholders waiting for the painting's return. They are a physical reminder that the story is unfinished. From Boston, we continue to another American city, a place where museums and galleries meet high-end boutiques, and where criminals approached luxury with calculation and style. Our final story takes place in Baghdad, in the early days of the Iraq War, a moment when the entire country was collapsing and ordinary rules no longer applied. It is considered first place in this ranking not because of flair or intrigue, but because of the sheer scale of money involved and the unusual way it was taken. According to later accounts, shortly before the U.S. invasion, Saddam Hussein issued a directive to the Central Bank of Iraq. The instruction was simple: release a massive sum of cash to his son, Qusay Hussein. No paperwork, no lengthy authorization, just a written order, delivered at a time when the whole country was bracing itself for war. The request was enormous: 900 million USD, mostly in $100 notes, plus approximately 100 million euros. In total, over $1 billion worth of currency. At about 4 in the morning on March 18, 2003, as airstrikes over Baghdad began, several army trucks arrived outside the bank. 3 to 4 trucks, according to the accounts. Men in uniform entered, retrieved the cash bag by bag, and loaded it into the vehicles. No dramatic break-in. No alarms, no disguises. Simply a command, followed by compliance. The entire operation lasted roughly 5 hours. When it ended, the trucks departed, the bank doors closed, and the cash, more than $1 billion, disappeared into the chaos of a nation at war. Any normal investigation was impossible. Government records were in disarray, institutions were collapsing, and within months, both Saddam and Qusay were dead. Where the money went and who ended up controlling it remains uncertain. Some reports claim that part of the sum was later recovered by U.S. forces in different locations. Other portions are believed to have been moved through private channels or absorbed into networks that emerged during the conflict. What makes this story so unusual is that, unlike the other cases we've discussed, this was not a traditional heist. There was no careful planning inside a vault, no tunneling, no disguise. It was a withdrawal, authorized at the highest level, executed quietly, in the final hours before Baghdad fell. In the world of thefts and disappearances, few events compare, not because of elegance or mystery, but because $1 billion in cash simply left a national bank and never fully returned. From here, we will step back and bring the entire journey together, a brief reflection on what these stories reveal and why we continue to be fascinated by them. Thank you for spending this time with me. We've traveled through different places and periods, from quiet museum halls in Boston to a diamond center in Antwerp, to tunnels beneath Fortaleza, and finally to Baghdad during the first hours of war. Some of these stories were marked by patience and planning. Others unfolded quickly, taking advantage of a moment when the world was distracted. But each of them reminds us how fragile even the strongest systems can be. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, calm, detailed, and told at an easy pace, you can support the channel simply by liking the video and subscribing. If you want, you can also share in the comments where you're listening from. It's always nice to see how far these stories travel. For now, I hope this helped you unwind, learn something new, or simply pass a quiet hour. Rest well, take care, and I'll see you in the next story.